True mermaids, breaking barriers on the water. Have you ever wondered why the ocean feels so vast yet so exclusive? Why certain faces are missing from the decks of commercial fishing vessels? I recently had the profound honor of interviewing Mermaid Q Manley, a true lighthouse of wisdom whose brilliance illuminates the darkest corners of maritime inequity. Her journey as a Black woman navigating the treacherous waters of commercial fishing isn't just inspiring, it's revolutionary. Through her unwavering courage and spiritual strength, she has become a beacon for countless others, challenging systemic barriers while creating pathways where none existed before. The water should be the great equalizer. It doesn't care about your skin color, your gender, or your background. Yet somehow we've managed to import our land based prejudices onto the waves. The ocean, covering more than 70% of our planet, has become yet another arena where human bias dictates who belongs and who doesn't. When Mermaid Q speaks about the fishing industry, she doesn't just describe a profession. She reveals an entire ecosystem of exclusion that has remained largely invisible to those of us who simply enjoy seafood without questioning whose hands brought it to our plates. Her voice carries the weight of generations who have been systematically kept from building wealth and tradition through maritime industries. Think about this for a moment. In 2023, the overwhelming majority of recreational fishers in America were white. Black participation, statistically negligible. This isn't because Black communities lack interest in fishing or maritime traditions. It's because generations of exclusionary practices have systematically denied access to the networks that provide permits, vessels, and the knowledge needed to succeed. Let that sink in, like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples of this exclusion extend far beyond just who gets to catch fish professionally. They determine who builds generational wealth, who shapes policy, who controls our food systems. When we talk about food sovereignty and security, we rarely consider who actually harvests what comes from the sea. True mermaids, as Mermaid Q powerfully describes, are those who navigate these waters despite the barriers, those who transform the storms they've weathered into fuel for others' journeys. Her metaphor isn't just poetic, it's profoundly accurate. Those who have been excluded yet persist develop a unique capacity to move between worlds, to translate experience into wisdom that can guide others. I want to share three critical insights from our conversation that changed my perspective forever, and I hope they'll change yours too. First, racism doesn't stop at the shoreline, it sails right out to sea with us. Second, the fishing industry has constructed nearly impenetrable barriers to entry that disproportionately impact marginalized communities. And third, resilience, that extraordinary human capacity to not just survive, but transform through adversity, can become a lighthouse for others when we share our stories. Let's dive deeper into each of these. When we think about racism in America, we rarely picture boats, nets, and fishing permits. But the water holds some of our oldest and most persistent inequities. Commercial fishing isn't just an industry, it's a complex social ecosystem with its own hierarchies, traditions, and exclusionary practices. Consider this. Fishing has long been a cultural touchstone in many communities across America. Yet, discriminatory practices from redlining waterfront property ownership to racially exclusive hiring have systematically blocked the generational transfer of wealth via fisheries licenses or businesses. Organizations like Outdoor Afro have recognized this gap and begun creating pathways through mentoring programs that connect youth of color with established fishers. These initiatives provide crucial skills training and access pathways that have been historically denied. Each year, dozens of young people get their first saltwater experiences through these programs, but progress remains painfully slow. At leadership levels within the industry, representation of Black professionals, especially Black women, remains vanishingly rare. And this isn't accidental. It's the result of deliberate choices made over generations about who belongs on the water and who doesn't. The second insight from Mermaid Q reveals why this exclusion persists so stubbornly. The extraordinary economic barriers to entry. In New England fisheries, for example, limited access permits can cost over $500,000, $500,000 just for the right to fish commercially. This astronomical figure effectively locks out new entrants without substantial intergenerational capital or connections, a situation exponentially worse for BIPOC entrepreneurs due to historic wealth gaps. As family run fisheries decline amid corporate buyouts and bankruptcies, community identity suffers. And so do opportunities for newcomers lacking legacy ties. The consolidation of ownership in fewer and fewer hands means that the industry becomes increasingly homogeneous and inaccessible. Some nonprofits have begun offering microloans or developing cooperative models that allow collective purchase and sharing of permits among minority fishers. The Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance has pioneered such approaches. Through pooled resources or partnerships with local buyers and restaurants committed to diversity sourcing, a handful of aspiring captains from marginalized backgrounds have managed to break through. But these success stories remain the exception, not the rule. Without larger policy changes, most aspiring BIPOC captains remain shut out of an industry that should be accessible to all with the skill and determination to pursue it. And this brings us to perhaps the most disturbing dimension of exclusion on the water: human rights abuses in global seafood supply chains. For decades, cheap seafood has depended partly on ignoring abuses suffered disproportionately by non white and migrant laborers working unseen aboard industrial fleets. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing operations often exploit vulnerable labor pools, including migrants and BIPOC workers facing substandard conditions and even human trafficking risks. International watchdogs like Greenpeace have been pushing supermarkets toward traceable and sustainable sourcing while advocating for protections and labor rights at sea. Some retailers now require supplier audits and certifications addressing both environmental sustainability and human rights. But as recently as last year, only two major US supermarket chains received passing scores on these metrics. Increased consumer awareness plus investigative reporting has forced incremental industry change, but so much work remains ahead. The intersectionality between race, labor, and environmental justice issues at sea forms a complex web that requires our collective attention to untangle. As Mermaid Q so powerfully articulates, these challenges aren't just abstract policy issues, they're lived realities that shape who gets to build a life and livelihood connected to the water. But here's where the conversation shifts from challenge to transformation, because the third insight from our interview with Mermaid Q Manley is perhaps the most powerful: resilience embodied through weathering storms, both literal and figurative, can lead to profound transformation. When you survive storms at sea, Mermaid Q shares, you develop a kind of spiritual strength that can't be taught in classrooms or boardrooms. You become a true mermaid, someone who belongs to both worlds and can navigate between them with grace and purpose. This resilience isn't just about individual survival, it's about creating pathways for others. It's about standing as a lighthouse for those still finding their way through foggy, uncertain waters. The metaphor of the lighthouse is particularly apartment lighthouses don't eliminate storms. They don't calm the waves. They simply provide unwavering guidance that helps others navigate safely through treacherous conditions. That's exactly what pioneers like Mermaid Q do when they share their stories and create spaces for others who have been historically excluded from maritime industries. They don't make the journey easy, but they make it possible. And this is where each of us comes in because change on the water requires action on land as well. After hearing Mermaid Q's powerful insights, I believe we all have a role to play in creating more equitable access to maritime industries, especially those of us outside traditional maritime circles. We can support policies increasing equitable access within commercial fisheries. We can seek out and welcome diverse voices wherever we encounter them on deck, whether that's in fishing, shipping, marine conservation, or any water related field. And perhaps most importantly, we can mentor someone whose story isn't yet being told. As the African proverb reminds us, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. The journey toward equity on the water will be neither fast nor easy, but it's one we must undertake together. Maya Angelou once wrote, "You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated." This resilient spirit echoes throughout Mermaid Q's message. The storms we weather, whether personal challenges or systemic barriers, can become the very fuel that propels us forward and lights the way for others. Today, I challenge you to see the ocean differently, not just as a beautiful backdrop for vacation photos or a source of delicious seafood, but as a contested space where issues of race, gender, and economic justice play out daily. I challenge you to question who harvests your seafood, under what conditions, and who profits from their labor. I challenge you to recognize that our collective blindness to these issues makes us complicit in perpetuating them. Because when we ignore the exclusion happening on the water, we reinforce the systems that enable it. But most importantly, I challenge you to become a lighthouse, to use whatever privilege, platform, or power you possess to illuminate pathways for those who have been systematically excluded from maritime spaces, whether that means supporting organizations creating access for youth of color, advocating for policy changes that make fishing permits more affordable, or simply amplifying the voices of those like Mermaid Q who are breaking barriers on the water. The ocean may cover 70% of our planet, but its bounty and beauty have been accessible to only a privileged few for far too long. It's time we change that. It's time we recognize that true sustainability isn't just about fish stocks and marine ecosystems. It's about creating equitable human systems that allow all communities to build relationships with the water. As Mermaid Q would remind us, we all have the capacity to become true mermaids, to navigate between worlds, to weather storms, and to emerge stronger for having done so. The question is whether we'll use that strength solely for ourselves or whether we'll extend a hand to others still struggling to stay afloat. The choice is yours. The time is now, and the waters are waiting.